And that would be Sonata Cheyenne. Um, and that one is has to do with this Sand Creek massacre of 1864. Had the government, and I don't know who it was in the government or what agency had communicated to the Cheyenne Nation to take the women and children and elder people to Sand Creek, and that they had promised by way of, I don't know if it was a treaty or a letter or somehow, that everything would be fine if they got everybody to this Sand Creek. Well, I don't know, I don't think it was the whole Cheyenne Nation. I'm not sure. But anyway, a whole bunch of Cheyenne people went to Sand Creek, and then uh, this is how the piece ended, is talking about the massacre of 1864. And the piece starts and ends with very sort of peaceful but sort of lonely sounding sections. And the reason why those lonely sounding sections are there, the middle part of the piece is very violent. And at least two people remarked that the piece really scared them. One was Kurt, and the other one was someone else. And I'm sort of happy that it scared them, because it should. Uh, the the piece starts and ends with a quiet section, and what I like about it and what it's meant to say with those quiet sections is the world before the murder was exactly the same as the world after all these murders. We can go in and like shoot people up and like mutilate their bodies and chop them up into a million pieces. It doesn't accomplish anything. And so this piece is basically, in my mind, is a plea for peace. There's no reason to go kill anybody. Nothing is ever solved by that. The world keeps doing that over and over and over again, like, oh, let's go kill some people because this time it's really gonna work.
Yeah.
No, it never works. It's just, and I don't think this world is real, as you know. And I am happy about that, because peace, because I think it makes a statement, it makes a comment actually that people can think about when they listen to it. Are they going to be scared by the middle part? Which, if they're scared by the middle part, then maybe think about the ending parts. Maybe think about how wars are not, they're not necessary. We don't need to, they're not necessary because they've never accomplished anything. And every time humanity goes another year or two or 10 years some country or some group of people think, oh my gosh, we've really got to go and kill whoever. And then everything goes back to the way it was before. And then someone, oh, now we got to go and kill whoever. It's a silly cycle that doesn't amount to anything. And so anyway, I like that piece about that. Do you want me to pick a different piece and talk about it?
Yeah, pick another piece.
So well, basically the thing that is in common with all these different pieces is that they're all they're for me and for you and for all of us to bring up a subject for us to everyone to think about. Um, Lots of music in the past was written to like, show off a pianist or a violinist um, or some other kind of something like that. Like Liszt wrote Transcendental Etudes for him to show off on the piano. I I, I don't know. I am working on a cello sonata, and that does have some show-offy parts, so I guess that would fall into that bracket. I don't think there's anything wrong about writing any kind of music, but it's just that it's always more interesting to me to have the music represent some types of thoughts that I think are interesting or uh, for people to think about. Um, I think the next one I would pick would be one that you would pick too, the Sonata Chet Lahey and the songs of Chet Lahey. Well, is it Chet Lahey, not Chet
Yeah,
Lahey?
Chet Lahey.
Chet Lahey, yeah. Um, those two works are written around poems of David Paladin, who's a great artist, and um, let's me look at my notes here. They were, like we talked about before, they were written as sort of, or at least I had hoped that they would be companion pieces of music to the art that David Paladin created. And but those songs and the sonata are I'm trying to think of it the best way to say it. Um, it's they're all questions that people can think about. The very first movement of or first song in the song cycle, first movement in the piano piece is Journey to the Spirit World. And uh David Paladin wrote a poem, Journey to the Spirit World. And I wanted to the very first thought when years ago in like 87 when I started working on it, um, was to try to think about how to make Journey to the Spirit World personal, because I thought that the only way that I might be able to have a chance of getting through to anybody listening to it, for them to think about their interpretation of what David's words were or the music is to make it personal. So in the music, I Brahms is in there. I mean, you won't recognize any of these composers. You'd have to analyze the music and take it apart and then analyze Brahms, and so it isn't obvious, but Brahms is in there, Prokofiev is in there. Debussy's in there. Schoenberg's in there in this movement in this song. I think that's it. There might be someone else, but those are the ones I remember. Because this is an old piece, so my memory is not. Anyway, so then the next part is in my dream. And in my dream, I interpreted and wrote about like it was a dream of separation. You've got the sun and the moon, and David writes about them like their sun and the moon are two separate things, but sometimes they're the same, but sometimes they're separate. And that's what really clued me in that the poem was about separation. So I wrote about it. It's that song and that movement has two different tempos that happen. They jump back and forth. So I made a separation by making different tempos. Um, I made a separation by giving the sun and the moon sort of different intervals and uh, different little ditties. I just wrote about separation. The next one is Blackstone. Blackstone is about fears and pain, and David suggests talks about fears and pain in terms of what the Sioux Nation how the Sioux Nation might remedy if somebody was suffering from fears and pain, and that's the Black Stone. So that's kind of a lament, and so I just let that be what that is. And so I just let that be what that is. And that was didn't do anything other than just paint the picture like what David wrote. And then the last movement and the last song is called Peace. And all of and Peace I actually wrote about. What kept going through my mind is instead of writing about peace, I want to write about what is not peace. So peace doesn't happen until the peace stops. So it's at the very end when the whole thing stops and the end happens in such a way that the audience would just sort of be kind of sitting there like, was that it? And that's peace. was that it? And that's peace. They're finally left alone. Um, but all of these poems by David, uh, I wanted to write the music in such a way that people might think, what do I think the world is? What do I think peace is? What do I think separation is? Is there such a, like they would go through these ideas. Um,
What inspired you to want to write a piece about David's poetry? What
uh,
had inspired you?
talking to David, David, Pat, do you want me to tell that story or?
Yeah.
David left us in 84. Um, and, um, and I started working on this music in 87, but the reason I started working on it in 87 was either late in 86 or early in 87. I had a dream with David and he said, "Hey, Mark." And I was, "Yeah, David, what?" And as I knew who he was in the dream and I was talking to him, like which is always the case in dreams. I never have to, I very rarely, I can't say never, very rarely have to say, "Who are you?" You just sort of know. So he said, "You're gonna set some of my poems to music." And I said, "I am." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, okay." So he said, "Call Linda up when you wake up in the morning. Ask her for the poems that I wrote that I wish I could set to music." And she remembers because I said that to her. And when I called up Linda, she said, "Oh, yeah, I know which ones those are." So she sent me um, Journey to the Spirit World, um, In My Dream, Blackstone, Cloud Songs, and Peace to set. So I did because I was supposed to. So, and I knew that they were going to be, this relates to the movie that you and I love, The Arrival. I knew they were going to be done someday. I didn't know, I'm glad I didn't know how long it would take because it took over 30 years to do it. Not because I wrote one note and then put it down and then 2 weeks later I wrote another note, but I kept writing it. I would write it over and over and over again in different ways. And each time I wrote it, I wouldn't like it. And that happens to me a lot. That's kind of how I compose is it's not easy for me usually. I write and I don't like it, I throw away and I write it and again. And anyway, so that's how that happened. Um uh the cello, do you want me to mention the cello sonata? That's similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a really dear friend whose name is David Tev. I worked with David when I played violin in an orchestra in Spain. David was and his name isn't David because he was David was French, and I think he was from Paris, but I could be wrong. So it was David. So that's why I say David. I'm not trying to be weird or anything. So David passed away. I don't know what year. My brain is fuzzy. I think it might have been 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. No, it was more than that. Okay, I'm thinking of chronology. It was more than 5 years ago because I think because 5 years ago I started working on the cello sonata. And the reason I started working on it was I had a dream and I saw David and he had his cello. And he said, "Mark, you're going to write a cello sonata for me." And I said, "I am." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Yeah, well, I think I said to him, I'm used to this, so fine." And he said, "I'll play the beginning." And so he had his cello and he played about four or five measures. And I was so excited. I woke up in the middle of the night. I went to get music paper. I wrote it down, and it's still the beginning of the cello sonata. So I figured with that one too, it's going to be done. I have to hang in there. It's been another long process, but I just have to just put up with that. I write a lot of stuff that sucks until, so that's that.